Hey, how's it going? Been a minute since I made a Marvel United painting video, so here we go. Continuing in the X-Men Blue Team box, today we're painting Psylocke. As I start every mini, I break out my very high-tech strip of cardboard and some tape to hold the mini in place while I give the whole thing a nice coat of black primer. After letting a couple coats fully dry, I then hit it with some white primer from the direction I want the main light source to come from. And since the psychic blade will be its own light source, I'm brightening up that area as well. Now with it primed and ready to go, we can start adding our first set of colors to the wet palette, starting with French Vanilla, Sunny Yellow, Cobalt Hue, and Apple Red. Now I'll be referring to these simply as yellow, blue, and red because saying the full names gets kind of annoying. So pulling some of the tan, I'm aiming to mix a good base skin color to work with, adding just a little bit of the yellow to brighten it up, and then an even smaller bit of red and blue to add some depth. The card art is very helpful to check how accurate my mix is, and in this case it seems to need to be a little bit warmer. But red would probably darken it too much, so I bring out some hot pink. Now, while you can barely see the difference on camera, and maybe not even in person, I think it made a world of a difference. Now, with our base skin tone ready, I thin it out a little and start blocking out all the sections of skin. While it might be common sense to seasoned painters, knowing which colors I should start with on each mini was not really something I picked up on when I first started. So typically, you want to start with the most recessed areas that will be the hardest to paint without getting excess paint on other sections. And this is typically the skin, but not always. Mixing in a bit more red and blue to our base, and a touch of pink to soften it up some, we can go back and start defining those shadows. Pushing them back and giving the mini a bit more depth. With the lights and darks now blocked out, I go back and blend the edges. I'm simply mixing the base tone with the shadow color that we just made. And as you can see, I have some shaky hands, so this hook on my painting handle helps a ton to stabilize my brush for these finer details. Now, adding our next batch of colors, we have titanium white, pure black, and violet pansy, which we'll use for her eyes. But before that, I add a touch of white to our skin tone, and I add some highlights to the high points on the skin. Now for the eyes, I like to start by filling them in fully with black and adding the eye layers on top, making sure to leave a small rim of black around the whites. This really helps the eyes pop even on such small figures. And if I hadn't forgot to hit record, you'd see me add a dot of violet for the irises, a smaller dot of black for the pupils, before adding these little tiny dots of whites for those shines on the eyes. And before moving on, we can't forget to add some color to her lips. So I'm mixing some violet and pink to get a few shades to work with. And a touch of white to add the little shine. And moving on to her suit, which is a slight greenish blue. So I pull a good amount of blue and a touch of yellow until I think it looks about right. Now once again, we thin this down and give the whole suit a once over. I'm mixed mostly out of shot because checking the camera each time is hard. I add in a little red and blue to get this deeper hue for the shadows. And just like with the skin, I go in and redefine the shadows to add back that depth. Pull in some white, and we can pull up the first layer of highlights. And with a little bit more white, we can add in some final shines. So for her sash belt, I'm starting with just a watered down red. Pulling in some blue for the shadows. And cleaning up the front with some more red before mixing our highlight, which is just adding in a touch of yellow. With the suit done, we can now look to the hair. Since my violet is a touch too vibrant to work as a base, I mix in some of my red and blue to help pull that vibrancy down a bit. Now, I don't like using black to mix my shadows, but with the base color that's already dark like this, there's not really any other better option, at least not with the paints I have. Before moving on to the highlights, clean up the base color a little and blend it into the shadows where needed. For the highlights, I add a touch of white and hit the highest spots facing our imaginary light source. This does end up looking a bit too white, so I feather in a very thin coat of the base purple to kind of pull it back down a touch. For her weapons, I'm starting with the Psychic Knife, giving it a couple passes of pink and then pulling in some white. I hit those high points. As I said at the start, the knife will be putting off its own light, so I'm slowly building up a pink glow in the surrounding areas of her body. Starting out with a very thin down pink, slowly building up color before finishing with some near white pink highlights. Now moving on to the normal blade, I'll be testing my hand at some more fairly simple non-metallic metal. Mixing a nice black to white gradient to work from, I add in my base gray and start figuring out where to add the lights and darks. Now, describing what I'm doing and why with non-metallic metal is not easy, since I largely have no clue what I'm doing yet. So I really just add in some highlights here and there, some dark lines next to them, and do some blending until it looks decent enough. With the body all done, all that's left is the base. And as is the case with a lot of the Marvel United minis, this base is just a mess of concrete rubble, which means more gray. Now once I have a nice base of gray down, I mix some blue and red with a darker gray to get a nice cool shadow tone. dry brushing some lighter gray onto the front, trying to go for a more realistic look, which I think makes for a cool contrast to the more comic book style I paint the characters in. And for the final touch of color, I mix some red and yellow to get a nice rusty orange that will go on this exposed rebar. Giving them some highlights and pulling back the shadows. And for the heck of it, I bring out my very rare Citadel paint. This is Valdor Gold. I thin this way down and give all that rebar a single pass. It's just a fun little touch, a little sparkle. And last but not least, we can't leave this rim looking boring. I give it a couple passes of white first, which will help the next color go down much easier and more vibrantly. So all heroes get a blue rim, and you could stop here if you want, but I like to add a little flair to the rims. So breaking out our final color, Calypso Sky, I block out 3 stripes around the rim. And I just start blending in from blue to Calypso, and then Calypso to white, until we're left with a pure white line at the very center. And then after an off-camera coat of varnish and some gloss on the rim for some durability, this mini's all done. Thanks to all who made it to the end of the video. As a full disclaimer, I actually finished this and the rest of the Blue Team box all the way back in November of last year. But between the charity art piece I was working on, actual work, and a pretty rough start to 2025, I'm just now getting around to putting the videos together. I'll be trying to throw in a Marvel United video between other projects going forward, but we'll see how it all shakes out. See you all in the next video for some more sculpting or painting just for fun. Alright, bye.